Today we're in Cumberland, Maryland at the Western Maryland Rail Fest. As you just saw, sitting in the station right now is a B40-8 pulling the Frostburg Flyer. However, behind this train is the 1309, the main attraction. Also at Railfest is the CSX Gevo and WMSR's brand new locomotive, number 111. Once the Frostburg Flyer leaves on its way to its namesake town, 1309 will pull into the station right behind it to load its passengers, including us. With that, it was time for 1309 to make her grand arrival. Something that I did not expect, Western Maryland's brand new Dash 8, number 561, unveiled this morning, is on the rear of our train today. With two blasts of 1309's whistle, the Helmstedter's Highball left Cumberland Station. rail trail that runs along the entire Western Maryland Scenic Road where the second track used to be, so there were a lot of rail fans and other people on bikes watching the train as it went by. While we're on the train, why don't we talk about the two locomotives pulling us back and forth between Cumberland and Helmsteaders. On the front of the train, and obviously the more interesting, is CNO 1309. 1309 was the last of the articulated steam locomotives ordered for the CNO, and therefore making her the last Class 1 steam locomotive built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works. On the other end of the train is Western Maryland Scenic Railroad number 561. It was built as a long hood forward unit for NS in 1989 as a B40-8. It now runs cab forward and was recently repainted into the fireball paint scheme that it wears right now. Coming back into Cumberland, we can see a CSX coal train going over the bridge into Cumberland Junction. I'm not sure if that's the official name, but that's what I'm going to call it. Over in a field right next to where you get off the train, they had a bunch of stands, including the T1 Trust, an organization building a brand new Pennsylvania Railroad T1. In the middle, looking around, I heard 1309's whistle, and she started pulling into the station to load her next group of passengers. Because we knew that the train wouldn't be leaving for another hour, we headed over to CSX's Cumberland shops to see what they had in store. Over there we found a bunch of rebuilt locomotives, including an SD50-3. The main part of the Cumberland shops is the giant turntable, and located here is the aforementioned SD50-3, SpongeBob Square Cab GP38, and of course, a G-Bow. Hidden under a small building was an SD40, and next to that was a YN2 number 81 and two SD70 Mac rebuilds. As we were moving locations, we saw the coal train from earlier's two DPUs and two GP38s sitting in the yard. We headed over to the famed Cumberland Deadline, where we found some Jeeps, a YN2, some GP9 from some unknown tourist railroad, and various other common CSX equipment. After a while at the yard, we knew it was soon time for 1309 to depart, so we headed down to Klein's restaurant to get the first shot of the day. There's some beautiful scenery here with the CSX line on one side of the river and the Western Maryland Scenic on the other. Seeing smoke off in the distance, we knew it wouldn't be long until 1309 came thundering through the mountains. Once 561 had cleared us, we headed down the road and tried to beat her to Helmstedter's Curve. Along the way, we got stopped at a red light and just barely beat her to the only bridge along the line. We easily beat her to Helmstedter's Curve, and I got this amazing shot of her thundering around the famous railfing spot. train stopped just around the curve, and the crew of 561 started out the engines and brought them back around Helmstedter's curve, getting another shot for all the rail fans. As you can tell by how rough that shot was, I had barely any time before we reached Dakota Avenue. This would be our last shot for this run, and we headed down to the Amtrak station where we saw nothing.
Bruh.
However, we would return to Dakota Avenue for the next trip, as we decided to hit every single place we did in reverse order. After that, we raced back to Helmstedter's, just barely beating her in time. And just as quickly as they came in, they left. For the last shot of 1309, we headed back to where it all started at Klein's restaurant.
Boy, ain't no way, bro.
I was also able to get a pretty mid-underneath shot of 1309. After that, we headed back to the Cumberland yard, where the only really interesting thing we saw were two SD40s on a yard job.
In 0.2 miles, use the right lane to turn right.
However, we did see some sort of train parked behind a manifest, and we had a theory that it would soon be passing by the Amtrak station. So, after a quick look at some yard power, we headed down to the Amtrak station. And 45 minutes after we got there, we finally saw the power. It stopped. Are you joking? Oh wait, that makes more sense. Yeah, so apparently there were two CSX coal trains, and they were meeting in the middle of Cumberland right in front of us. Yeah, so apparently the locomotive leading that other coal train, the one we saw sitting in the yard, is missing the CSX logo on the front. CSX really has great quality control. And look at that, a back trailing second. After that, we had to leave for the long drive back home to Pennsylvania. Thank you all for watching, and goodbye.
Nope.
Turns out we're not leaving just quite yet, because as we were leaving Cumberland, this notification popped up on my phone. So we headed back to the Cumberland yards to attempt to find it. However, wherever we looked, the Connor was nowhere to be seen. Just as we were giving up hope, two rail fans in the Little Caesars parking lot gave us directions on where the Connor might be, and sitting behind the Roy Rogers in Cumberland was this heritage unit we so desperately were looking for. After the conrail and the attached locomotives headed back into the yard, we heard across the river a horn. That ended up being 561 for 1309's train, pulling out a caboose and Western Maryland Scenic Railroad number 501. For those of you who don't watch me often, a GP30 is my favorite type of locomotive, and that's just what 501 is. I actually saw 501 a very long time ago when I was just a little kid. So this was a nice way to end off our Cumberland trip.